This is Safe Places Civil Rights Training presented by Callie Belt, and it is adapted from the South Michigan Food Bank 2022. Welcome. The goal for today's training is to provide knowledge of rights and responsibilities for both recipients and program staff, including volunteers and interns, to ensure equal, fair, and respectful treatment consistently of everybody seeking and receiving services, to eliminate illegal barriers which prevent or deter anyone from receiving benefits, and lastly, to promote dignity and respect for everyone. So moving on to civil rights laws. Civil rights laws and regulations are in place to ensure that people are not discriminated against by programs that receive federal funding assistance. They apply anytime there is any federal financial assistance. This will include cash grants, food commodities, training, equipment, and other goods and services. So a few programs that receive federal funding assistance are the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, S.A.F.E, and as well as Safe Place. In addition, we also purchase food from the federally funded local food bank for our clients in shelter. So TFAP and CSFP are federally funded agencies that receive federal. These are agencies that receive federal money and federal commodities. Because of this, these programs, including Safe Place, are subject to civil rights regulations. Safe Place follows laws and regulations to protect the civil rights of our clients served, including Title VI, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Americans with Disabilities Act, Age Discrimination Act of 1975, the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, and program statutes and regulations to include race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're finally, at long last, moving on from the structures and branches of government and onto the structures and branches of trees. This is a nature show now. Okay, we're not moving on completely because we're still talking about courts, but today we'll be discussing actual court decisions and the kinds of things that courts rule on rather than how they do it. That's right, we're moving on to civil rights and civil liberties. Okay, first I want to talk about something that I find confusing, the difference between civil rights and civil liberties. Usually in America we use the terms interchangeably, which adds to the confusion, but lawyers and political scientists draw a distinction, so you should know about it. Then you can go back to calling civil liberties rights and civil rights liberties, and most people won't care. But I'll care. I'll be disappointed in you. So civil liberties are limitations placed on the government. Basically, there are things the government can't do that might interfere with your personal freedom. Civil rights are curbs on the power of majorities to make decisions that would benefit some at the expense of others. Basically, civil rights are guarantees of equal citizenship, and they mean that citizens are protected from discrimination by majorities. Take, for example, same-sex marriage. You could think of it as a liberty, except that not everyone is free to marry at any given time. 6-year-olds can't get married, and you can't marry your sibling. But same-sex marriage is a civil rights issue because in the states that don't allow it, the majority of voters is denying something to a minority, creating inequality in the way that the laws work. Now, just to make things more confusing, lawyers often talk about the difference between substantive and procedural liberties, but they usually call them rights instead of liberties. It's a lawyer eagle. A legal eagle. Substantive liberties are limits on what the government can do. For example, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law establishing religion. So this means that they cannot create a national church or declare that Christianity or Islam or Hinduism is the official religion of the U.S. Procedural liberties are limits on how the government can act. For example, in America, in courtroom dramas, there's a presumption that someone is innocent until proven guilty. This presumption means that in criminal cases, juries and judges have to act as though the accused is innocent until the prosecution convinces them otherwise. If they are not convinced, the accused person doesn't go to prison. So now that we understand the difference between civil rights and civil liberties perfectly because of my amazing explanation, let's focus on the liberties and try to figure out what they are and where they come from, with some help from Thought Bubble. So civil liberties are contained in the incredibly unhelpfully named Bill of Rights, which isn't even called that in the Constitution. It's just the name we give to the first 10 amendments. The 9th Amendment is included to remind us that the list of liberties and or rights in the other amendments isn't exhaustive. There might be other rights out there, but the Constitution doesn't specifically say what they are. Thanks, Constitution. In some cases, it's pretty pretty clear. The First Amendment, for example, says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or abridging the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or to assemble or to infringe the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Pretty straightforward. But other cases are not so clear. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but it doesn't say by whom. Same thing with the Fifth Amendment guarantees against self-incrimination. Could Congress force you to incriminate yourself? How would they do that? And the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishments, like presumably shock pens. But it doesn't say who is forbidden from cruelly and unusually punishing. My mom wasn't forbidden from keeping me from playing video games. As usual, we might expect the Supreme Court to sort out this mess, but initially they were no help at all. In a case you've probably never heard of called Barron versus Baltimore, decided in 1833, the court said that the Bill of Rights applied to the national, meaning federal government, not to the states. They said that every American has dual citizenship, but not the good kind. They meant that you are a citizen of the U.S. and of the state in which you reside, and basically that the Constitution only protected you from the federal government. In other words, if the state of Indiana wanted to punish me cruelly or unusually, they could. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So Barron versus Baltimore left Americans in a bit of a civil liberties pickle. And not the good kind of pickle. They were protected from the national government doing terrible things like quartering troops in their homes, but not from the state doing the same thing. And since the state was close to home and the national government was far away and compared with today, tiny and weak, these protections were pretty weak sauce. So what happened to change this? I hope something, because I like a zesty government sauce. The 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court happened. After the Civil War, as part of Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were added to the Constitution. Of these, the 14th is the most important, probably the most important of all amendments. What does it say? Well, the first section, which is the one that really matters, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, okay? It reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." What this means is that the federal government's like, listen, states, you can't be dumb. Just stop it. Okay, we're all in this together, all right? It means states can't deny equal protection, civil rights, or due process, which in this case encompasses civil liberties. This, in theory, makes it impossible for states to infringe upon the liberties in the Bill of Rights. But the legal system being what it is, it's not quite that simple. Did you think it'd be simple? The Supreme Court could have just ruled that all the rights and liberties in the Bill of Rights applied to the states, which seems to be what the 14th Amendment implies, but they didn't. Instead, they ruled that each of the rights or liberties had to be incorporated against the states on a case-by-case basis. This is a concept called selective incorporation, and it supposedly reserves more power to the states. What it really means is that when people felt that the states were violating their liberties, they had to go to the Supreme Court, which by now has incorporated almost every clause in the Bill of Rights against the states. You want examples? We got them. In the famous case of Gitlow versus New York, the court ruled that the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech could not be violated by a state. In this case, it was New York, but once a liberty is incorporated against one state, it's incorporated against all of them. In Mapp versus Ohio, the court ruled that states couldn't use evidence gathered from warrantless searches. In Benton versus Maryland, the right against double jeopardy, being tried for the same crime twice, was incorporated against the states. By now, almost all the rights and liberties mentioned in the first 10 amendments have been incorporated against the states. This means that individuals are protected from all their governments taking away their liberties, and that's a good thing. I loves my liberties. So we'll be talking about civil rights and civil liberties for a number of episodes, and this topic, while confusing, can be lots of fun. We might play liberties bingo, or civil rights kickball. I don't know what those things are, but they sound like fun. The main thing to remember is that going all the way back to the framers, Americans have been concerned about a too powerful government taking away citizens' freedoms. Yes, these liberties apply mostly to citizens, although some do apply to non-citizens too. In order to put limits on government, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution in 1789. But this didn't mean that those limits applied to the states, probably because the founders expected states to be the main protectors of rights. And in fact, many state constitutions have provisions that copy or in some ways go beyond what's in the U.S. Constitution. Only after the 14th Amendment was passed following the Civil War did the national government get around to addressing this issue of states denying people's liberties. Even then, it took numerous court cases for us to get to the point that most of the liberties that we assume cannot be taken away by the government have actually been guaranteed through the process of selective incorporation. It's taken a long time to get where we are, and there's still a long way to go. Protecting civil liberties requires vigilant citizens to be aware of the ways their government is overstepping its bounds, but that's only half the equation. It's also vital that our majority pay attention to the civil rights of others, and that we ensure that everyone is afforded the same protections and benefits promised by our system of law. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course Government and Politics is
A protected class is any person or group of people who have characteristics for which discrimination is prohibited based on law, regulation, or executive order. So civil rights are non-political rights, and the USDA prohibits discrimination in all program and activities based on race, color, national origin, age, disability, sex, political beliefs, and religion. And sometimes the law allows for provisions that limit program participation, such as the age requirement for CSFP. The law says this program is only for those over the age of 60. So talking about types of discrimination. First, disparate treatment, and that's intentional discrimination. Then we have disparate impact, and that's a neutral rule impacting a group disproportionately. That's where actions cause unintentional negative results for a protected class. And then we have reprisal or retaliation. That's an act against someone who opposes discriminatory practices. Those involve a civil rights complaint or exercising civil rights. So an exception would be Congress can establish a program that is intended for certain groups of people, and it is not discrimination to exclude those who do not meet eligibility requirements, like the CSFP age requirement we previously discussed. All right, we have our first scenario situation. So, a food pantry that receives federal financial assistance is not accessible to people with wheelchairs. What are some possible solutions to this problem? Our scenario discussion for a food pantry that is not wheelchair accessible. So some possible solutions would include having parking lot accessibility for all, entrances and hallways up to code, including ramps, making sure it's the adequate size for accessibility. Um, Other possible solutions, depending on floors and where the food pantry is located, elevators, making sure there's accessibility to get to higher levels in a building. Um, in general, possible solutions for accessibility for all include making sure restrooms are accessible to all and up to code as well. Other possible solutions include sign language interpreters or signage, as well as braille signage and service animal accommodations. Um, and then finally, alternative arrangements for service as well, because programs must ensure access with reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Sites should be accessible to people with all types of disabilities, mobility, sight, hearing, etc. Or alternative means of service delivery should be advertised and provided as well. Providing language assistance. So agencies and programs must take reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to your programs and activities by persons with limited English proficiency or LEP. Agencies and programs must be flexible to provide these services and activities. And how these services are provided depend on the number and proportion of limited English proficiency persons served, the frequency of LEP persons contact with the program, the nature and importance of the program, and as well as resources available and costs involved. All right, another scenario situation. So, some people come to the food pantry and do not speak English. You can't understand them and you have no idea what language they are speaking. You write a note down to give someone stating that they need to return with an interpreter. Is this an acceptable practice? No, this is not an acceptable practice. Your shortage of resources does not eliminate the requirement of providing assistance. Going into that, so children, if they are accompanying their parent who are minors, should not be used as interpreters. Volunteers in your program may be used as interpreters, but make sure they understand interpreter ethics, including particularly confidentiality. Collection and the use of data. Collection and the use of data is required in the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, or CSFP. The collection and the use of data is currently not required in the Emergency Food Assistance Program, except for initial estimates. So this data helps determine if there are any disparities between the potentially eligible population and the participating population, as well as showing discrimination. And if also helps determine if future outreach efforts should target potentially eligible persons and households to make them aware of the programs offered. Continuing with collection and use of data, people are asked to self-declare their income, and if they refuse to disclose their information, you or someone else will use their best discretion to code that person's race, ethnicity, or other info. This data helps determine whether there are disparities between the people that are eligible and those that are being served. And all data must be kept secure and confidential. And Safe Place specific policy is never to guess or estimate this information. Instead, we record this data as unknown or leave it blank. Moving on to another scenario situation. So an organization wants to enclose religious literature with the food packages. Is this allowed? Another organization wants to include political advertising on its distribution bags. Is this practice allowed? Political or religious distribution. The answer, no, neither is allowed. So no organization that receives direct federal funding assistance from the USDA can discriminate based on religious or political belief. These organizations cannot engage in any political or religious activities when distributing food. This includes distributing written items or allowing politicians to campaign during the food distribution times. Laws that protect beneficiaries. So faith-based organizations retain their independence and carry out their mission as long as USDA funds or activities do not support worship or religious instruction. This 2004 law, Equal Opportunity for Religious Organization, breaks down that religious organizations cannot discriminate against anyone based on religion or religious belief, that faith-based organizations can use space in their facilities without removing religious art or symbols, and that no USDA funds can be used for religious activities. Information on those activities cannot be distributed to clients, and they cannot be made to feel that participation in a religious activity is necessary to receive assistance. Coming up with another scenario situation. So, as a part of its meal services, a soup kitchen wants to require a prayer before a meal. Is this practice allowed? Scenario discussion. So, yes, the soup kitchen can have a prayer said before a meal. However, that person leading the prayer must make it clear that the activity is not a part of the program and not endorsed by USDA, that cooperation and participation in the activity is not a condition to receive benefits, and thirdly, that the activity is not conducted in a manner that disrupts the commodity distribution or the meal service. Attempting to convert people to another opinion and particularly another religion is prohibited under the faith-based rules and regulations. Public notification. So the And Justice for All poster must be posted at your program site that details non-discrimination and information regarding how and where to file civil rights complaints. This poster must be translated into the major primary languages of the LEP participants in your service area, must also be posted in a visual area of any agency that TFAP or S.A.F.E funds are received, must also provide appropriate information in alternative formats with disabilities and in other language for limited English proficiency populations, and it must also be the most recent and correct font size of the poster. Public notification continued. Agencies and programs are required to send out public notifications of their programs to potentially eligible persons. Agencies and programs also must convey the message of equal opportunity in all photos and other graphics that are used to provide program-related information. And agencies and programs must include the required non-discrimination statement on all appropriate food nutrition service and agency publications, websites, posters, and informational materials. The non-discrimination statement referenced in the previous slide has two versions, the long and the short version. The long version is, in accordance with federal law and U.S. Department of Agriculture policy, this institution is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. To file a complaint of discrimination, write USDA, Director of Office, Southwest, Washington, D.C., 20-250-9410, or call 800-795-3272, or call 202-720-6382. USDA is an equal opportunity provider and employer. The short version of the non-discrimination statement states, this institution is an equal opportunity provider. And the short version may be used where the longer statement does not fit in with graphics, material, or content. This should not be posted where information on civil rights is provided and must also be in font size no smaller than that used in the rest of the publication. Filing a complaint. Everyone has a right to file a discrimination complaint, and we never discourage groups or individuals from filing complaints or from voicing the allegation of discrimination. To file a complaint in Michigan, you can write to the Regional Director, Civil Rights, EEO, USDA, Food and Nutrition Service, Midwest Region, 77 West Jackson Boulevard, floor 20, Chicago, Illinois, 6064 3591, or call 312-353-3353. To file a complaint to the USDA, you can write to USDA, Director, Office of Civil Rights, 1400 Independence Avenue, Southwest Washington, D.C., 20-250-9410, or call 800-795-3272, or call 202-720-6382. Compliance reviews and resolution. So state and federal governments are required to conduct compliance reviews for agencies and programs to check for non-discrimination and ensure that civil rights requirements are being followed. If it is determined that an agency or program is out of compliance, then inappropriate actions must immediately cease and appropriate procedures must be instituted. Failure or refusal to resolve the complaint can result in loss of federal assistance. When we're providing customer service, the platinum rule is to treat others the way they want to be treated, and the double platinum rule is to treat others the way they don't even know they want to be treated. This includes treating everybody with dignity and respect, being patient and polite with every interaction. This also can include being empathetic, understanding that people may not know the rules or understand how programs work, and that they may feel uncomfortable coming to ask for help or explanations. Providing customer service can also include smiling when appropriate. This makes people feel welcome and valued. Also can explain policies and let them know you must follow the same rules for everybody. Do not be afraid to apologize and don't feel you need to have the last word in every interaction. Providing conflict resolution. So if a conflict occurs, try to remain calm. You want to listen and be empathetic and use information to determine what the issue is. You try to explain the situation with rules, expectations, and then offer solutions and follow-up. And get help or call for immediate assistance, especially if the threat of violence is possible. All right, we have a shelter scenario for Safe Place specifically. So with our crisis line, we have a victim calling for resources to help their situation, and that they mention they have limited English speaking ability. So to ensure you obtain accurate details and information, what are possible next steps? Possible next steps for providing language assistance include calling your on-call support for guidance and how to provide those resources, also using the resource binder to find appropriate translation services available to you. Safe Place has resources in place for translation services during a crisis call, including immediate electronic translation services and community partnerships with translation organizations for in-person interpretation. Another shelter scenario. A residential client is released from the hospital and coming back to shelter. They are able to take care of themselves, however, they are using a wheelchair while healing. So, what are ways to make their stay at shelter more accessible? So, client accessibility in shelter. Safe Place is a fully independent shelter. However, to ensure all clients have access around shelter, advocates may move rooms to provide easier access for a client on the first floor with a fully accessible bathroom. This also can include the use of our front door ramp, ensuring that all doorways and hallways are clear of obstruction and ADA up to code, as well as having communal food items accessible for our client.
TFAP and CSFP civil rights training requirements. Civil rights and household food distribution. Any program that receives federal funding must comply with civil rights laws, regulations, instructions, and guidance. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, CSFP, are federally funded programs. Civil rights guidance for USDA Foods program can be found in FNS 113. Civil rights and protected classes. Civil rights are non-political rights that apply to everyone and are based on traits of identifiable class categories. Discrimination based on these traits is prohibited by law. The civil rights protected classes are race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and age. Forms of discrimination. Discrimination is the unfair treatment of a person or group of persons based on their protected class. Discrimination may be intentional or unintentional and falls into one of three categories. Disparate treatment happens when discrimination occurs so that any of the protected classes is intentionally denied service. An obvious example would be refusing service to one nationality but serving all others. Disparate impact happens when an action unintentionally creates negative results for a protected class. A good example would be asking immigrants to wait until the end of food distribution for an interpreter to be available, but in the meantime, the site runs out of food. Reprisal or retaliation happens when intentional negative treatment occurs to anyone of a protected class in response to previous civil rights activity. For example, someone makes a complaint and they are refused service at the next food distribution. Goals of civil rights. Agencies are responsible to ensure that all applicants and participants receive equal and consistent treatment. Provide knowledge of civil rights and responsibilities to program participants. Eliminate illegal barriers that prevent or deter people from receiving benefits. Promote dignity and respect for everyone. Training expectations. Recipient agencies are responsible for annual training of volunteers and staff who interact directly with program participants. Agency staff that do not interact with program participants may also receive training if desired. Agencies are required to document training and maintain the documentation for 3 years plus the current year. A faith-based organization is defined as a group of individuals united based on religious or spiritual beliefs. The most common type of faith-based organization is a church. A local agency cannot prohibit a faith-based organization from being a distribution location simply because it is affiliated with a religion. When a faith-based organization is a distribution site, it must keep food distribution independent of its faith-related activities. That is, they cannot make a requirement for anyone to participate in their rites, prayers, or receive literature in order to receive food. The building does not need to remove any religious art, icons, scriptures, or other religious symbols. The location must post or have readily available information regarding the closest secular distribution site. The Michigan Department of Education can provide your agency with a template for the Notice of Beneficiary Rights to be posted in faith-based locations. Identification is required for CSFP. This is an application-based program. Identification is presented during the certification stage. Local agencies can choose either to accept personal ID or an agency-created ID, such as a green card at distributions. No identification is necessary for TFAP. All TFAP information is self-declared, including name and address. At no time during the certification or distribution of either CSFP or TFAP should legal status or citizenship be questioned of an applicant or participant. Collection and use of data. All collected program participant information must be kept secure and confidential. CSFP regulations require annual reporting of participants' racial and ethnic data. Participants are asked to self-declare racial and ethnic data. This can be done during their certification to become a program participant. If a participant refuses to provide data, they are to be advised that the information will be collected based on observation. Agency staff identify and document racial and ethnic background to the best of their ability. The agency is to maintain all records for 3 years plus the current year. Public notification. All agencies are required to distribute public notifications of their program to potentially eligible persons. Special efforts should be made to reach underserved groups who may qualify for services using appropriate media. Notifications should include a list of locations, hours of distribution, and agency contact information. Agencies should provide information in different formats and languages to best meet the needs of the local community. All materials must contain the USDA non-discrimination statement. It is helpful to convey the message of equal opportunity through photos and graphics. Non-discrimination statement. The USDA non-discrimination statement must be included on all materials that mention USDA food programs. Font size for the long version must be at least the same font size as the rest of the publication and must be readable. USDA non-discrimination statement long version. In accordance with federal civil rights law and U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, civil rights regulations and policies, the USDA, its agencies, offices, and employees, and institutions participating in or administering USDA programs are prohibited from discriminating based on race, color, national origin, sex, disability, age, or reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity in any program or activity conducted or funded by USDA. Persons with disabilities who require alternative means of communication for program information, such as Braille, large print, audio tape, American Sign Language, etc., should contact the agency, state or local, where they applied for benefits. Individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or have speech disabilities may contact USDA through the Federal Relay Service at 800-877-8339. Additionally, program information may be made available in languages other than English. To file a program complaint of discrimination, complete the USDA Program Discrimination Complaint Form AD 3027, found online at www.ascr.usda.gov/complaint-filing-cost.html and at any USDA office, or write a letter addressed to USDA and provide in the letter all of the information requested in the form. To request a copy of the complaint form, call 866-632-9992. Submit your completed form or letter to USDA by one of the following: Mail, U.S. Department of Agriculture Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, 1400 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20250-9410. By fax, 202-690-7442. Email, program.intake@usda.gov. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. USDA Non-Discrimination Statement, short version. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. The short version may be used where the longer statement does not fit and must be in a font size no smaller than the font size used in the rest of the publication. the short version may not be used in place of the long statement on clients' rights documents, especially when a signature is collected to certify or declare information. And Justice for All poster. Prominently display the poster where participants can easily see it during certification and distribution. This poster serves as a trademark indicating the site provides a USDA program without discrimination. The poster must be the most recent green one and the correct size of 11 inches by 18 inches. Agencies may request posters from MDE. Complaints. Everyone has the right to file a discrimination complaint. All staff and volunteers need to know what to do if someone wishes to file a complaint. Complaints may be based on any of the protected classes, race, color, national origin, age, sex, and disability. Complaints may be written or verbal. Provide forms for written complaints and take detailed notes if verbal. Never discourage anyone from filing a complaint or voicing concerns of discrimination. Civil rights complaints may be sent to the USDA at Regional Director, Civil Rights, EEO, USDA Food and Nutrition Service, Midwest Region, 77 West Jackson Boulevard, Floor 20, Chicago, Illinois, 60604-3591, or call 312-353-6657. Compliance reviews. The state and federal governments are required to conduct reviews to determine compliance with civil rights regulations and requirements. Agencies are reviewed either every other year or every fourth year, depending on the program. Civil rights compliance is part of the review. Example review questions. Is the And Justice for All poster publicly displayed? Have all staff and volunteers received civil rights training annually? Is the USDA non-discrimination statement included on all outreach materials? Does the agency have a limited English proficiency (LEP) plan? What accommodations does the agency make for those with physical disabilities? Resolution of noncompliance. MDE may review areas that require corrective actions to address findings during the review process. Agencies are required to stop inappropriate actions and institute appropriate procedures that meet federal regulations. Reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. If the facility is not handicap accessible, parking, entrances, hallways, elevators, restrooms, etc., then assistance must be provided by the agency. The use of a proxy for food pickup, delivery out to participant vehicles, home delivery, or other alternative arrangements are to be made to meet the needs of participants with disabilities. Language assistance. Limited English proficiency, LEP. Individuals whose primary language is not English. Limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. Language assistance is required, but there is some flexibility on the methods used. Volunteers may be used as interpreters and must maintain participant confidentiality. Children should not be used as interpreters. Visit www.lep.gov for more information. Factors for limited English proficiency plan. Shortage of resources does not eliminate requirements to provide language services. Some level of language assistance is necessary and must cover the needs of known participants and prepare the agency to manage new language needs. Levels of language services can be proportional to demand from eligible local population, frequency of LEP persons' contact with the program, nature of program, activity, or service. Customer service. Treat everyone with dignity and respect and make people feel welcomed. Smile when appropriate. Be patient and polite. Make sure all participants receive equal treatment and service. Equal does not mean identical. For instance, one participant may receive corn and another may receive green beans. Accommodations for people with disabilities or language needs are not special favors. Find tools and techniques to improve customer service. Recognize that participants have varied needs and sometimes few resources. Develop good listening skills. Learn to put yourself in their place when necessary. Ask yourself, am I treating this person in the same manner I treat others? Conflict resolution. Remain calm. Listen and be empathetic. Use the information to determine what the issue is. When appropriate, apologize for the situation. Explain the situation, such as rules and expectations. Offer solutions and follow up. Get help, especially if threats or if violence is possible. Additional resources. Additional information on civil rights can be found at the following websites: www.michigan.gov/MDE-FDP, Michigan's Food Distribution Programs. The MDE also offers online training for agency staff and volunteers that includes an online quiz and a printable certificate of completion. The MDE website also offers online training for agency staff and volunteers that includes an online quiz and a printable certificate of completion. This can be found at www.michigan.gov/MDE-FDP in the Civil Rights section. The USDA Civil Rights Division website, www.fns.usda.gov/civil-rights. The Office of the Secretary for Civil Rights, www.ascr.usda.gov. Limited English Proficiency, www.lep.gov.
Thank you so much for sticking through this training with me. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.